I was 16 the day my mother walked out of my life. It wasn't a sudden argument or a fight. There were no harsh words, no dramatic slamming of doors, just her figure in the doorway, suitcase in hand, eyes avoiding mine, and a quiet, almost casual, "I can't do this anymore." I remember standing there, frozen, staring at the empty space she left behind, and wondering if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. The person who had been my anchor, my protector, my constant, was gone. And with her, she took a piece of my sense of safety, leaving me alone to navigate a life that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. For weeks afterward, I expected her to come back. I imagined her walking through the front door, apologizing, explaining that she needed time but would always be there for me. But the door remained shut. The silence settled around me like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. I had to learn, overnight, how to survive in a world I thought I understood, only to discover I didn't. My father was out of the picture long before I can even remember, leaving her absence even more glaring. At 16, I was suddenly the one responsible for everything: the apartment bills, the groceries, the laundry, even the simple task of keeping myself fed and clothed. School became both a refuge and a torment. On one hand, it was the one place where routine existed, where teachers expected homework and exams but not emotional explanations. On the other hand, every holiday, every family event, every whispered conversation about parents and siblings reminded me of the void in my own life. My classmates laughed at homecoming, exchanged gifts during holidays, and shared stories of vacations that I had never experienced. I smiled, laughed, and nodded along, all while pretending that I, too, had a mother who loved and guided me. Inside, though, I felt a deep, gnawing anger mixed with a sorrow so heavy it was almost physical. I learned to rely on myself, to trust no one fully, and to make do with what I could. Part-time jobs became my lifeline, anything to keep the lights on, the fridge stocked, and my dreams alive. I discovered resilience I didn't know I had. Every paycheck was a small victory, every completed task a reminder that I could survive without her. I became fiercely independent, the kind of person who doesn't wait for anyone to save them. And yet, beneath the armor of independence, there was still a child who longed for her mother's presence, for someone to tell her she mattered, that she wasn't alone. That longing never went away. It lingered quietly, hidden behind determination, tucked beneath the layers of self-reliance I built like armor around my heart. Even as I learned to navigate the world, I knew that life had given me a lesson I would never forget, that abandonment leaves marks, but it can also forge strength unlike anything else. That was the day my life changed forever. The day I learned the true meaning of loss, resilience, and survival. I was 16, abandoned, and yet, unknowingly, on the path toward a version of myself that no one, not even my mother, could ever break. After my mother left, the years that followed were a mix of survival, self-discovery, and constant reminders of what I had lost. 16 was supposed to be a time of laughter, of friendships deepening, of learning to dream about the future. Instead, it became a relentless lesson in independence and endurance. I had to navigate a world that suddenly felt hostile, where everyone else seemed to have someone to rely on while I relied solely on myself. School was a complicated place. I wasn't invisible, far from it, but the absence of a parental figure made me an easy target. Whispers followed me down hallways. "Where's your mom? Does she even care?" I learned to smile politely, to nod and move on, but each comment stung like a tiny blade. Still, the adversity taught me resilience. I discovered that people's judgments mattered little when I was determined to keep moving forward. I focused on academics, excelling in subjects I loved, pouring my energy into achievements that no one could take away. Each success became a quiet rebellion against the chaos of my personal life. Outside of school, life demanded pragmatism. I found part-time jobs, waitressing, tutoring, even babysitting, to cover basic expenses. Money was tight, and every dollar earned was precious. I learned to budget meticulously, to stretch meals creatively, to find satisfaction in small victories. Independence became not just a necessity, but a point of pride. Friends came and went, often unable to understand the responsibilities that weighed on me, but I slowly built a small circle of people who truly cared. They were my chosen family, my support system, those who never judged my circumstances. Even as I carved out this life, the ache of abandonment lingered. Holidays, birthdays, and family events were constant reminders of the void left behind. Watching classmates receive hugs, gifts, and loving words from parents made the absence of my own mother palpable. I learned to hide the longing, to tuck it away beneath layers of determination. And yet, that longing fueled me. It became a quiet engine pushing me toward success, proving to myself that I could thrive without the care I had been denied. By the time I reached my early 20s, I had created a life I could be proud of. I had an apartment I could call my own, a steady job that paid the bills, and friends who had become my family. I had survived the harshest lessons early, and those experiences had shaped me into someone fiercely independent, resourceful, and unafraid to stand alone. But even with all that, a part of me remained vigilant, wary of people who might abandon me, a silent scar from the past that refused to fade. Growing up alone taught me strength, yes, but it also taught me something more subtle, the ability to measure the value of people not by blood, but by loyalty, love, and presence. It was a hard lesson, but one that would define every choice I made in the years to come. By 16, I had learned that life could be cruel, but I had also learned that I could survive, thrive, and eventually reclaim the power that abandonment tried to steal from me. By the time I reached my early 20s, I had learned the fine art of building a life from nothing. The years of struggle, the long nights juggling jobs and schoolwork, had taught me one undeniable truth. I was capable of more than anyone, even myself, had imagined. What started as mere survival had slowly transformed into ambition, determination, and the first glimmers of real success. I had an apartment I could call my own, modest but safe, a job that paid the bills and allowed me small indulgences, and a routine that, while exhausting, gave me a sense of control I had never felt before. I was no longer the timid, abandoned girl who had waited for someone to come back and save her. I had become someone who planned, executed, and thrived on her own. My mornings began early, with meticulous routines designed to maximize productivity. I worked long hours, often sacrificing leisure, because I knew that stability required discipline. Every paycheck, every promotion, every small acknowledgement of my work was a victory, a tangible reminder that I was capable of succeeding without anyone else's help. Despite my growing independence, loneliness remained a constant companion. I had friends who cared, a few mentors who offered guidance, and a community of people who respected my efforts, but there were moments when the absence of family pressed heavily against my chest. Holidays, birthdays, and milestones often highlighted the void I felt, the gap left by a mother who had chosen to leave. Yet, I refused to let longing dictate my life. Instead, I channeled it into ambition, turning each pang of absence into motivation. I wasn't going to wait for someone to recognize my worth. I was going to create it myself. With time, I began to expand my world beyond mere survival. I invested in learning, exploring courses and skills that could elevate my career. I nurtured friendships that were genuine, built on mutual respect and loyalty rather than obligation or blood ties. I celebrated my victories privately at first, unsure if anyone else would understand the depth of effort required, but gradually I allowed myself to take pride openly. I realized that the child who had been abandoned was transforming into a woman who could thrive on her own terms. And yet, the past never completely vanished. Memories of that fateful day at 16, the silence, the shock, the unanswered questions, lurked beneath my accomplishments. I often reflected on what might have been, imagining a different life, a different childhood, a different mother. But those thoughts never weakened me. They strengthened me. They reminded me that life had given me obstacles, but it had also given me the chance to overcome them. By the time I felt truly established, I had achieved something remarkable, a life built entirely on my own effort, resilience, and vision. I had learned that independence was not just about surviving, it was about thriving, reclaiming control, and turning loss into strength. The girl who had once been abandoned was gone, replaced by a woman who had mastered her destiny, prepared for whatever challenges or surprises life might throw her way. Life had settled into a rhythm I was proud of, the kind of rhythm earned through years of struggle and determination. I was no longer that 16-year-old abandoned girl. I had built a life that, while modest, was entirely my own. Then one ordinary afternoon, the world tilted on its axis again, in the form of a plain envelope that landed on my doormat. At first, I thought it was just another bill or a routine notice. The handwriting, formal and precise, carried the kind of authority I hadn't seen in years. I opened it carefully, scanning the contents. My heart skipped as I read the first lines. It was an invitation to my late uncle's inheritance reading. My mother's name was on the list. My fingers trembled as I continued reading, the words blurring together with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and curiosity. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Why should I step into a world that had already caused me so much pain? The thought of seeing my mother again, of facing the family who had let me struggle alone, filled me with dread. And yet, something deeper, an almost instinctive need to face the past, urged me to go. Perhaps it was closure I sought, or maybe the faint hope of seeing justice done. Either way, I knew that turning away would leave questions unanswered, and I wasn't willing to give anyone that satisfaction. The days leading up to the reading were a storm of conflicting emotions. Memories of abandonment surfaced uninvited, the quiet breakfasts alone, the nights of uncertainty, the sting of seeing peers with mothers who loved and protected them. I reminded myself that I had survived, that I had thrived, that I had built a life entirely from my own effort. Still, the thought of walking into a room with my mother, who had once left me without explanation, made my stomach knot. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that projected confidence and strength. I wasn't a frightened child anymore. I was a woman who had fought her way to stability and independence. The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet, reflective. I rehearsed what I might say, how I might respond, and what my presence there truly represented: power reclaimed, resilience affirmed. Entering the room, I was greeted by the cold, polished faces of family members I hadn't seen in years. My mother's gaze met mine for a fleeting moment, a mixture of recognition and surprise, before she turned her attention to the lawyer. I gripped my folder, a tangible symbol of everything I had accomplished alone, and reminded myself that, today, I was not the abandoned child. I was the one with the power to face the past and define the future. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old money. The lawyer began the reading, and the weight of years, of injustice, of abandonment, hung in the air. I realized then that this inheritance was not just about wealth. It was about confrontation, about choices, about the life I had built while others had questioned whether I could survive at all. For the first time in years, I felt both fear and exhilaration. I was stepping into a moment that could change everything, not just financially, but emotionally. The past had led me here, but the future, finally, would be mine to command. The room was hushed as the lawyer cleared his throat, arranging the papers before him with deliberate precision. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of every stare on me. Faces I hadn't seen in years, polished and calculating, turned toward me in silent assessment. My mother sat across the room, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of surprise and something that looked suspiciously like anxiety. The lawyer began in a steady, measured voice, outlining the rules of the reading. Each clause, each stipulation of my late uncle's will, carried a subtle tension that made the air feel electric. I clutched my folder tightly, the leather smooth under my fingers, a tangible reminder of the life I had built alone, my accomplishments, my independence, my resilience. Here, in this room, my past and present collided. As the reading progressed, my relatives' faces shifted between greed, disbelief, and impatience. My mother leaned forward, her voice suddenly eager, as if to assert her presence. "We'd like a clarification regarding the estate. Surely, as family, certain provisions favor us." Her words dripped with authority, entitlement masking the absence that had defined my childhood. I felt a surge of emotion. Anger mingled with the quiet satisfaction of finally being seen, not as the abandoned girl, but as the rightful heir. When the lawyer finally reached the portions of the will that concerned me, a hush fell over the room. He paused, eyes meeting mine, and in that moment, I realized the full impact of my uncle's decisions. My heart thumped with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. The majority of the estate had clauses favoring the estranged niece. I felt my mother's gasp beside me, sharp and involuntary, a sound that echoed in the silent room like a confession. The tension was palpable. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see her mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how to claim what she had no right to demand. The room seemed to shrink, every detail heightened, the smell of polished wood, the faint ticking of a clock, the subtle rustle of papers as the lawyer continued reading. Every clause, every stipulation, reinforced my position. I was no longer invisible. I was present. I was powerful. Other relatives whispered among themselves, murmuring disbelief and speculation. I stayed silent, watching, listening, letting their reactions play out. I realized then that this reading wasn't just about money. It was a test of authority, of control, of character. My uncle had left me not only a fortune, but the validation of my struggle, the recognition that the years of independence, of sacrifice, of perseverance, had not gone unnoticed. By the time the reading concluded, I had made a quiet, determined decision. This inheritance would not simply be a transfer of wealth. It would be my statement, my declaration that abandonment could not define my life. I had come into that room as the girl who had been left behind. I would leave it as the woman who had reclaimed her destiny, fully aware that the next moments, the confrontation with my mother and family, would test not just my resolve but my courage as well. The room fell into a stunned silence as the lawyer finished reading the key portions of my late uncle's will. I could feel the collective gasp of my relatives, a sound that seemed to ripple through the air and shake the polished wood walls. My mother's hand hovered over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. The millions she had anticipated, the wealth she had assumed was hers by virtue of blood, were now firmly, unmistakably, under my name. I sat still, my hands resting lightly on my folder, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was more than money. It was validation, vindication, and, perhaps, a subtle justice that only life could deliver. My uncle, the one who had seen me as a capable, resilient individual even when my own mother had not, had ensured that the one left behind was not forgotten. My mother's voice, sharp and trembling, broke the silence. "This can't be right. Surely there's some mistake. I am the mother. How can you leave the majority to her?" Her words, though composed, carried a mixture of panic and indignation. The lawyer, ever calm and impartial, merely shook his head. "I assure you, madam, the will is final and binding. These allocations reflect your late uncle's explicit intentions." Other relatives murmured among themselves, glancing at me with a mixture of awe, envy, and disbelief. I caught the subtle narrowing of their eyes, the way they leaned closer to whisper accusations and doubts. It was almost comical, the way years of expectation and entitlement crumbled under the quiet force of reality. Yet I didn't move, didn't speak. I let the room absorb the truth first, allowing the shock to settle in before any words could dilute its effect. I felt my mother's gaze burn into me, a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and something that almost resembled regret. She had spent years attempting to manipulate, to control, to dominate what she assumed was her natural claim. And yet, here she was, confronted by the undeniable proof of her miscalculations. Her silence, broken only by shallow breaths and nervous glances, was a testament to her shock. For me, the moment was bittersweet. Memories of my teenage years, of abandonment and solitude, mingled with the reality of my triumph. Every sleepless night, every struggle to make ends meet, every insult and doubt cast my way had led to this instant. I realized that the true inheritance was never just wealth. It was recognition of my perseverance, proof that the child who had been left behind could rise above the neglect, the cruelty, and the doubt. As the room continued to whisper and murmur, I straightened in my seat, lifting my chin with quiet confidence. I had endured years of absence and indifference, but now, the table had turned. I was no longer defined by my mother's departure. I was defined by my own accomplishments and the undeniable truth that I had survived, thrived, and now commanded the power that others had once assumed was theirs by default. The shock in the room was palpable, a mix of awe and disbelief, and I knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation, the negotiations, the decisions that would follow, everything would test the strength I had built in the years since abandonment. But for now, in this moment, the truth had been revealed. I was no longer the powerless girl of 16. I was the rightful heir, and everyone in that room knew it. The room, once stunned into silence, soon filled with murmurs, whispers, and sharp, demanding voices. My mother leaned forward, her fingers drumming impatiently on the polished table, as though the sound alone could somehow rewrite the reality that had just been laid bare. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice tight, controlled, but betraying the panic underneath. "I raised her for years, even if I wasn't present every day. I deserve a portion of this." I felt a surge of quiet fury, but forced myself to remain composed. Years of absence, years of abandonment, and years of indifference had taught me the power of patience, of observing before reacting. This was more than a family dispute over money. It was an attempt to rewrite history, to claim authority they had long forfeited. I sat upright, carefully watching the lawyer and my relatives, letting their demands play out. Other family members joined in, each trying to stake a claim. "Surely she doesn't need all of it," one aunt whispered to another. "She's done well enough on her own. Some of this should stay with us." Their whispers were meant to intimidate, to unsettle me, but I had grown immune to the judgment of those who had never truly seen me. I had built my life, endured hardship, and thrived without their recognition. Now their entitlement felt hollow, even desperate. The lawyer, calm as ever, interjected with quiet authority. "As per the will, the allocations are final. Any attempts to redistribute must meet legal standards. The late uncle's wishes are explicit." My mother's lip curled, a mixture of disbelief and annoyance, but the lawyer's words were immovable. I realized then that I held more than just legal validation. I held the undeniable power to stand firm, to enforce the respect that had been denied to me as a child. My mother's demands escalated, her voice rising as she attempted to assert control over the room. "This is my family. I have rights. You can't just leave me out." The irony was sharp. I had been left out of her life for years, denied support, care, and guidance, and now she demanded what she had no rightful claim to. I remained silent, letting her speak, allowing the room to witness the contrast between her entitlement and my calm, unshakable presence. I finally spoke, my voice steady, clear, and measured. "I survived without you. I built my life alone. This inheritance is not just about money. It's about recognition of the life I've created. I have no obligation to give what was never mine to begin with." The room went silent again, and I could see the shock ripple across their faces. My mother's jaw tightened, her nostrils flaring slightly, but she said nothing further. The room realized, slowly but surely, that I was not the same powerless child they remembered. I was composed, assertive, and unwavering. Every demand they made only strengthened my resolve. I had endured years of absence and neglect, but now I controlled the narrative, the outcome, and, most importantly, the power. By the end of the meeting, the message was clear. I was no longer the girl abandoned at 16. I was the woman who had claimed her life, her achievements, and her rightful place. And anyone who tried to undermine that would face the full force of a determination forged by years of survival, resilience, and triumph. Sitting there, listening to my mother and other relatives make their claims, I felt a strange mixture of anger, vindication, and clarity. This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated for years. The day the past and the present collided, the day I faced the very people who had once abandoned me or underestimated me. But beneath the tension and the demands, a deep certainty settled over me. I had the power to decide, and I would not let them dictate the terms of my life any longer. For years, I had been the girl left behind. I had survived heartbreak, loneliness, and indifference, building a life from scraps of hope and determination. Every sleepless night, every paycheck earned, every moment of self-reliance had prepared me for this moment. And now, as my mother pleaded for what she had never earned, I realized that the choice was mine alone. This inheritance was more than money. It was a symbol of my perseverance, of the strength I had forged through abandonment. I studied my mother's face, the tightness of her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands, the flash of desperation in her eyes. For years, she had believed she could manipulate life to her will, that her absence could be overlooked, that her entitlement was enough. But entitlement has no power over earned resilience. I understood then that giving in, even a little, would only reward years of neglect. I had no obligation to provide them with what they had not nurtured or supported. The lawyer watched, patient and neutral, as I gathered my thoughts. I could feel the room holding its breath, waiting for me to speak. And, in that stillness, I made my decision. I would honor the intent of my uncle's will and the life I had built. I would not be spiteful, but I would not yield. My inheritance, my achievements, my hard-earned independence, these were mine to protect. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but unwavering. I have considered everything said here today. This inheritance is not a reward for those who demand it, nor is it meant to settle old grievances. It reflects the trust and intent of my late uncle. I am grateful for what I have been given, but I will not compromise what I have earned alone. My life, my achievements, and this inheritance are a testament to perseverance, and they remain with me. A hush fell over the room. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line, and she glared at me, but there was nothing she could say. The relatives exchanged murmured glances, realizing that their attempts at coercion had failed. I had claimed my power, not through anger, not through revenge, but through the quiet strength that years of survival had instilled in me. In that moment, I understood that victory was not just about the inheritance. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my identity, and my right to stand firm against those who had once abandoned me. I had turned the past into my strength, and the room finally recognized it. For the first time in years, I felt complete, not because of wealth, but because I had the courage to make my own decisions and, at last, take control of my life. The tension in the room was thick, almost tangible, as I straightened in my seat. I could feel my mother's gaze burning into me, equal parts fury and disbelief, but I refused to flinch. Years of abandonment, struggle, and self-reliance had prepared me for this exact moment. No amount of pleading, whispering, or demands could sway me now. I had survived, thrived, and claimed my rightful place. Today, I would turn the tables entirely. My relatives tried to interject, offering excuses, attempting to appeal to sentiment or tradition. "Your family," one aunt said, her voice faltering. "Surely, you can share some of it." I listened, calm, letting each word hang in the air. I had spent a lifetime learning how to respond to manipulation, to requests rooted in entitlement rather than merit. Now, I had the clarity and authority to respond on my own terms. I opened my folder and placed it on the table, a subtle yet powerful statement. This was not just about inheritance. This was about every achievement I had earned without their help. "I've listened to all the arguments," I began, my voice steady, commanding attention. "But let me make one thing perfectly clear. This inheritance is not a reward for persistence, presence, or entitlement. It is a reflection of my late uncle's intentions and of the life I have built on my own. I will not relinquish what I have rightfully earned." The room went silent. My mother's eyes narrowed, her fingers gripping the table, but she found no words that could overpower my certainty. I continued, choosing each word carefully, aware that this was not just about money. It was about respect, validation, and closure. For years, I was abandoned, overlooked, and dismissed. I survived without support, without guidance, without the care I deserved. And yet, here I stand, stronger, independent, and fully capable of making my own decisions. I will not allow anyone to rewrite history or claim what is not theirs. Whispers rippled through the room, the relatives exchanging anxious glances. They realized slowly that I was no longer the child they had dismissed. I was composed, assertive, and unshakable. Every claim, every demand, only served to highlight their lack of foresight and my resilience. The power had shifted completely, and they were beginning to understand it. Finally, I leaned back, letting the silence do its work. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes flicked to the lawyer, then back to me. No more words. No more arguments. The decision was mine, and it would remain mine. The room absorbed the truth. The girl abandoned at 16 was gone, replaced by a woman who had reclaimed her life, her inheritance, and her authority. As I stood to leave, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had not only faced my past, but had conquered it. The tables had been turned, decisively and irrevocably. And for the first time in years, I walked away not with bitterness, but with the quiet, undeniable satisfaction of knowing that my life, my choices, and my power were truly my own. The reading was over. The lawyers had packed their papers. The relatives had murmured their final, defeated words, and my mother sat in stunned silence, her expression unreadable yet undeniably shaken. For years, I had carried the weight of abandonment, the sting of neglect, and the quiet ache of being overlooked. But as I stood there in that polished room, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. The inheritance, vast as it was, felt secondary to the moment itself. It was the symbol of all I had endured, all I had overcome, and all I had built entirely on my own. Money could never erase the pain of those years, but it validated one undeniable truth: I had survived. I had thrived. And now, I had reclaimed control over a life that had once seemed dictated by others' choices. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of my relatives, some scowling, some stunned, and a few quietly acknowledging the reality they could not change. My mother's eyes met mine one last time, and in them, I saw not just disbelief, but a flicker of recognition that I was no longer the girl who had once been abandoned. I had grown beyond the constraints of hurt and resentment, shaping my own destiny. Walking out of the lawyer's office, I felt the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The cool air outside hit my face like a cleansing force, and for the first time, I breathed fully, unencumbered by expectations, neglect, or fear. Every step I took was a declaration. I was in control of my life, my choices, and my future. The girl who had been left behind at 16 had transformed into a woman capable of facing any challenge, any obstacle, any betrayal, and emerging victorious. As I drove away, I thought about the journey that had led me here. The nights spent crying alone, the countless hours working multiple jobs just to keep afloat, the moments of despair when I questioned whether I could make it. All of it had forged the resilience that now defined me. I had learned that power wasn't handed to you. It was earned, nurtured, and defended. My uncle's foresight had been just the spark. I had been the one to carry it into a roaring flame. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just about wealth or vindication. It was about reclaiming my narrative, embracing my strength, and letting go of the past in a way that allowed me to stand taller than ever before. I didn't need approval, recognition, or forgiveness from those who had abandoned me. I had everything I needed within myself. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, I felt a profound sense of peace. The letters, the reading, the demands, all of it had culminated in a singular truth. I was no longer defined by absence or neglect. I was defined by my courage, my perseverance, and the life I had fought to build. That night, as I sat quietly in my own home, I allowed myself to smile, truly smile for the first time in years. The road had been long and painful, but the destination was worth every hardship. I had won more than an inheritance. I had won my life, my dignity, and my rightful place in the world. And nothing, not even abandonment, could take that away.